While I was laid up and recovering from surgery, my daughter-in-law tricked me into signing some papers. Then she cleaned out my entire life savings, $87,000. She took the money I earned with my own two hands and blew it on a life of luxury. They thought I was just some sick old man they could walk all over, but they were about to find out what the fury of a betrayed father looks like. Have you ever put your absolute faith in someone you love, only to find out that very faith was the weapon they used against you? Hello, brothers. Hello, fathers. Thanks for being here. Whether you're listening from your garage, your truck, or that favorite armchair that's molded perfectly to your back, I appreciate you tuning in. Let me know you're here with a like, and drop a comment to tell me where you're from. My name is Nicholas, and this is what happened to me. When I came home from the hospital, my own house felt like a foreign country. Everything was wrapped in a kind of fog, partly from the painkillers they had me on, but mostly from the hard, cold fact that I wasn't the master of my own body anymore. After the hip replacement, a dull, persistent ache settled deep in the joint, a constant, nagging voice reminding me of my own weakness. I, Nicholas, a man who'd spent 40 years forcing steel to bend to his will, welding seams that could withstand thousands of pounds of pressure, was now leaning on an aluminum walker that felt as flimsy as a toy. Every single step was a monumental effort. The familiar oak floorboards of my hallway seemed to stretch on for miles. Shuffling from the bedroom to the kitchen felt like crossing a desert. I hated that feeling more than anything I've ever known. It's the feeling of having to hold your hand out, of depending on someone else for the simplest things. A glass of water, a pill from the bottle on the counter. It eats away at you, you know? It grinds down the pride a man spends his whole life building, turning it into dust. You start to feel like less of a person, more of a piece of furniture that needs to be dusted and managed. My daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, showed up looking like an angel of mercy. She was all smiles and sweet, comforting words. "You just rest, Dad," she'd say, her voice like honey. "I'll take care of everything." And she did. She scrubbed the house until it gleamed, cooked hot meals that smelled wonderful, and always had my medication and a glass of water on the end table beside me, right on schedule. My son, Mark, was flooded with relief. "It's a godsend having Elizabeth here," he told me one afternoon, his shoulders finally relaxing after weeks of worry. I believed him. I really, truly did. I was grateful. So grateful that I pushed down any other feeling that tried to surface. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when I was just sitting there, I'd watch her. I'd watch her move through my house. There was something about her smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was too quick, too bright, like a flashbulb going off. But her eyes stayed cold, watchful. It was like a fresh coat of high-gloss paint slapped over a wall that had the beginnings of damp rot underneath. A tiny worm of unease would start to wriggle in my gut, a feeling that something wasn't right. But I'd quickly push it away, blaming it on the medication, telling myself I was just being a suspicious old fool. A few nights later, the pain hit me like a freight train. It wasn't the dull ache I'd gotten used to. This was a sharp, searing agony, like 1,000 tiny needles digging deep into the bone. I was exhausted, clouded by fatigue and the extra dose of pain meds I'd taken. That's when Elizabeth came into the room, quiet as a cat, holding a stack of papers. "Dad, I just need your signature on a few little things," she said. Her voice was fast and low, deliberately making it all sound trivial, unimportant. "It's just some forms so I can handle the utility bills and things online for you, just to simplify everything while you're recovering." She fanned the papers out on the table next to my chair, using a pen to point to the empty lines. "Right here and here." My head was spinning. The words on the page blurred together into meaningless black squiggles. All I wanted was for the pain to stop. All I wanted was to close my eyes and drift away. My hand trembled as I took the pen from her. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I signed my name where she pointed. My signature, a spidery wheat crawl that I barely recognized. I didn't question a thing. I just signed. And just like that, I handed her the keys to my entire life, all for the price of a few moments of false peace. From that day on, things began to change. Not in a big dramatic way you could put your finger on, but in 100 tiny, subtle ways. The Daily Mail, which for 30 years I'd made a habit of retrieving from the box at the end of the driveway myself, was now always brought in before I had a chance. She'd sort through it at the kitchen counter. When I'd ask, she would just flash that bright smile. "Oh, it's all just junk mail and flyers, Dad. I'm just clearing the clutter for you." The phone calls from my buddies started to dry up too. A couple of times, I'd hear the phone ring once, maybe twice, then go silent. "Probably a wrong number," Elizabeth would call out from the kitchen, her voice breezy and unconcerned. She was building invisible walls around me, brick by silent brick. My home, once my fortress, was slowly, quietly being turned into a prison. And I was the only inmate, completely unaware that the doors had just been locked. My only remaining territory, my last patch of solid ground, was my old, worn-out lazy-boy recliner in the living room. That chair was my whole world. The dark brown leather was cracked and faded, worn smooth over the decades. It smelled faintly of old pipe tobacco and newsprint, a scent I found comforting. It was my command center. From that chair, I could see out the big picture window to the street, and more importantly, I could watch the comings and goings inside my own house. And I started watching more closely. I saw the way Elizabeth's eyes would flick over to me when she thought I was dozing. I heard the hushed tones of her phone calls, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she carried the cordless phone into another room. I couldn't connect the dots yet, but the instinct of an old welder, a man who learned to diagnose a problem by the slightest change in the hum of a machine, told me something was wrong. A hairline fracture was forming somewhere in the structure of my family. Slowly, Elizabeth's attention began to feel different. It shifted from care to surveillance. She was always there, always hovering just at the edge of my vision. If I made a move to get up on my own, to shuffle to the kitchen for a drink, she would rush over. "Let me get that for you, Dad," she'd insist, her voice filled with a manufactured concern, but the hand she placed on my arm felt less like a support and more like a restraint. She stopped asking me what I felt like eating. She just placed a plate in front of me. Her constant presence became suffocating. She wasn't caring for a man who was ill. She was guarding a treasure. And I started to wonder, with a cold dread creeping into my heart, if that treasure was everything I had spent a lifetime building, and if I, myself, was now her biggest obstacle. Every morning, I would listen for 11 o'clock. That's when the mail truck would make its way down our street. It had a particular sound, a rattling grumble that I'd known for 30 years in this house. I knew the squeak of its brakes as it pulled up to our box, and I knew the metallic clank of the lid opening and closing. It was more than just a sound. It was the rhythm of a normal day. For my whole life, I've enjoyed getting the mail myself. It's a simple thing, I know. But walking out there, feeling the sun or the cold on your face, flipping through the bills and the junk, looking for that rare handwritten letter from an old friend, it's a connection to the world. It's a piece of your independence. But now, Elizabeth had shattered that rhythm. It was like she had a stopwatch in her head, synced perfectly to the mailman's route, and she was always one step ahead. The moment that familiar grumble started down the block, she'd be heading for the door with that bright, empty smile. "I'll get it, Dad," she'd chirp. The stack of envelopes would disappear with her into the kitchen, and what eventually made its way to my end table was nothing but a few worthless flyers for grocery stores and pizza places. The real mail, the important stuff, simply vanished. One afternoon, I caught a break. Elizabeth was busy in the backyard, pruning the rose bushes my late wife had planted. I saw her through the window, absorbed in her task. This was my chance. Using my walker, I slowly, painfully made my way into the kitchen to get a glass of water for myself. It was an act of defiance, really. My eyes scanned the room and landed on a stack of magazines she'd left on the kitchen table. And there, peeking out from between a Home Depot catalog and a pizza ad, was the corner of an envelope. A red envelope. It wasn't just red. It was the color of a warning light. The color of an accountant's ink when the numbers are bad. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, tired rhythm, suddenly kicked into a gallop. My breath caught my chest. Leaning heavily on the countertop, I shuffled my aching body over to the table. My old hand, the one covered in the faded scars and calluses of a lifetime of hard work, trembled as I reached out and pulled the letter from its hiding place. The bold black letters from the county tax assessor's office screamed at me from across the paper. Final notice. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. My fingers shook so badly I could barely tear the envelope open. The property tax bill was 3 months overdue. Below the terrifying bolded numbers was a box with a paragraph of text inside, warning me that if the delinquent amount wasn't paid in full within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. This house, the house I'd bought with a down payment that took me years to save. The one I'd re-roofed myself one brutal summer, sweating under the sun. The one I filled with furniture I built with my own 2 hands. I'd paid off the mortgage with years of overtime and calloused hands, celebrating the day we owned it free and clear with my wife. It wasn't just bricks and mortar to me. It was the physical proof of my entire life's work. It was where Mark took his first steps, where I taught him to throw a baseball in the backyard. It was filled with the ghost of my wife's laughter, the idea that it could be taken away. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. I had to grip the edge of the table with both hands to keep from collapsing right there on the linoleum floor. Just then, Elizabeth came back inside, still wearing her gardening gloves, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. I held up the letter. My voice came out as a ragged, unfamiliar croak. "What is this?" She glanced at the paper in my hand, then at my face, and a look of almost casual relief washed over her. "Oh, that," she said, her tone so dismissive it was terrifying. "I already paid that. The post office must have messed up the paperwork or something. You know how sloppy they are these days. Don't you worry about it. I'll give them a call and sort it out." She lied. She lied so smoothly, so effortlessly, without a single flicker of doubt in her eyes. And in that moment, her perfect, calm performance confirmed everything. Every little suspicion, every flicker of unease I'd felt over the past weeks suddenly crashed together and hardened into a single, cold, undeniable truth that settled like a block of ice in my stomach. My daughter-in-law was stealing from me. That incident sharpened my senses. I started noticing other things. My monthly bank statements, which I'd always used to balance my checkbook down to the penny, hadn't shown up for 2 months. When I finally worked up the nerve to ask her about them, she just gave me that same placid, unfeeling smile. "Oh, I had the bank switch everything over to a P.O. box, Dad. It's just easier to manage that way, keeps things from getting lost." She said that word, manage, as if I were a failing business, an incompetent child who couldn't be trusted with his own affairs. She had systematically, and with chilling efficiency, cut off every single line of information I had to my own life. I was living in my own house, eating food bought with my money, sleeping in my own bed, but I was completely blind to my own financial reality. That feeling of powerlessness was a deeper, more vicious pain than anything my body could produce. That night, sleep was impossible. The ache in my hip was nothing compared to the hurricane of fear and anger raging in my chest. I just lay there in the dark, my eyes wide open, staring at the familiar shadows on the ceiling. I listened to the steady, rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tock, tick, tock. And somewhere in that suffocating silence, between one tick and the next, a decision formed in my mind. It wasn't a loud, angry decision. It was quiet. It was cold. I might be old, I might be injured, but I'm not a fool. I'm a boilermaker. My entire life I was trained to find the hairline crack, the invisible weakness, the single point of failure before the whole damn system blows up in your face. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my family had a critical failure, a dangerous fracture, and I would not just lie here and wait for the explosion. I had to do something. I would find a way. My recovery was frustratingly slow, but a stubborn fire had been lit inside me. I was determined to walk on my own again, without the walker, without anyone's help. Independence, I figured, begins with your own 2 feet. One morning, I felt strong enough to make the trip to the mailbox myself. It was a small goal, but it felt massive. I wanted to feel the cold metal of the key in my palm, to open that little door myself. It was a simple task, but it was mine. I was halfway down the narrow hall, leaning on my cane, when Elizabeth came out of the kitchen, blocking my path like a toll gate. "You're still too weak for that, Dad. Let me go," she said. It wasn't an offer. It was a command. I just shook my head, my jaw tightening. "I can do it myself." A flicker of impatience, of pure annoyance crossed her face. As she squeezed past me in the tight space, she accidentally slammed her shoulder into mine. It wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it sent me stumbling sideways, my bad hip screaming in protest as I hit the wall. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This hallway is just so narrow. I was afraid you were going to fall." But I knew. We both knew. It wasn't an accident. It was a warning. The message was clear. You will go where I allow you to go. My best friend in the world is a man named Bill. We served in the Army together, in another lifetime. He'd call me a few times a week, regular as clockwork. We didn't talk about much, complained about the weather, the government, the latest losing streak of our favorite baseball team. But just hearing his gravelly voice was an anchor for me. It was a reminder of a time when I was strong. But lately the calls had stopped. One afternoon, I was sitting in my recliner when the phone rang. Elizabeth picked it up in the kitchen. I could hear the faint murmur of her voice, sweet as syrup. "Oh, hello, Mr. Henderson." "Yes, he's here. He's just resting right now. He's very weak today, you know. I don't think he's up for a chat." "Yes, of course. I'll tell him you called." Then, the click of the phone hanging up. She never even bothered to walk into the living room to ask me. She was methodically, deliberately, bricking me in, cutting every last thread that connected me to the outside world, turning me into an island in my own home. A few days later, I heard a commotion at the front door. 2 delivery guys were wrestling a giant flat-screen TV into my living room. I'd never wanted one. My old television, a sturdy box from another decade, worked just fine. "What the hell is this?" I asked, bewildered. Elizabeth beamed, a brilliant false smile plastered on her face. "It's a present, so you can have a nice big screen to watch your shows. I used your card, of course." That evening, I saw the credit card statement she'd carelessly left on the kitchen counter. My vision swam. It wasn't just the television. There were charges from expensive department stores I'd never set foot in for women's clothing. Charges from fancy restaurants where a single meal cost more than my weekly groceries. A hot, volcanic rage bubbled up inside me. I grabbed my cane and hobbled into the kitchen where she was humming to herself, washing dishes. "This is my life savings," I said, my voice shaking with an anger so deep it rattled my bones. "How dare you?" Many of us, men from my generation, were raised to believe that you handle your own problems. You keep your head down, you don't complain, you stay strong. But when the fight is inside your own four walls, with your own family, that silence can become a prison. Have you ever found it hard to speak up, to confront a loved one about something that felt deeply wrong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm listening. Elizabeth didn't even flinch. She turned around from the sink, her hands dripping with soap suds, and her face was a cold, hard mask. "This is not your money," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This is the family's money. It's for Mark's future and the kids' future." She lunged forward and grabbed my upper arm. Her grip was shockingly strong, her fingernails digging into my skin like claws. The pain was sharp, immediate. "Don't you be so selfish," she snarled, her face inches from mine. She squeezed harder, so hard I winced and let out a small, involuntary gasp. Then she shoved me back, and I stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe. The next morning, a dark, ugly bruise had blossomed on my bicep. The distinct purple imprints of her 5 fingers were a map of my own humiliation. It wasn't just a bruise, it was a secret. It was the physical proof that I was losing control, not just of my finances, but of my own body. From that day on, I started wearing long-sleeve shirts, even on the hottest days. I couldn't let Mark see it. What would I even say? That his wife had put her hands on me? How could I force him to choose between his father and his wife? And deep down, a terrible, burning shame consumed me. A man who used to haul steel beams for a living could now be bruised by his daughter-in-law. That shame hurt more than the physical pain. Hiding it, pulling on that long-sleeve shirt every morning, it felt like I was an accomplice to my own degradation, a coward hiding in plain sight. Her cruelty became more refined after that, more sinister. One afternoon, I was practicing with my cane in the living room. Mark was there, sitting in a chair reading the newspaper. Elizabeth walked past me on her way to the kitchen. As she did, she accidentally kicked the base of my cane. It was a small, deft movement. I lost my balance instantly, lurching forward, and only saved myself from a nasty fall by grabbing the arm of the sofa. "Oh my goodness, Dad, are you all right?" she cried out, rushing to my side as Mark jumped up from his chair. "I'm so sorry. I'm just so clumsy today." But I had seen it. I saw the quick, cold glance down at my cane just before her foot swung out. She had done it right in front of my son, a perfectly disguised act of aggression. It was a demonstration. It sent a clear, chilling message that echoed in my head long after. I can hurt you whenever I want, wherever I want, and no one will ever believe you. It took me days to build up the courage, days of turning the words over and over in my mind until they were smooth and worn like river stones. Talking to Mark, my son, about this felt like the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Harder than any weld I'd ever laid, any beam I'd ever hoisted. The last thing I ever wanted was to start a war in his home, to tear his family apart. But the silence, this heavy, suffocating silence, was poisoning me from the inside out. I was disappearing inside it. I chose a Sunday evening, after dinner. The Green Bay Packers were playing. It had always been our ritual, his and mine. We'd sit together in the living room, the drone of the commentators a familiar comfort, the quiet rustle of the newspaper the only other sound. It was a peaceful, masculine space. I was hoping, maybe foolishly, that inside the safety of that old ritual, he would hear me. Not just with his ears, but with his heart. I took a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic beating in my chest. I picked up the remote and muted the television. The sudden total silence in the room was jarring. Mark looked up from his phone, a question in his eyes. "Mark," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to talk to you." I started slowly, carefully laying out my concerns like fragile pieces of evidence. I told him about the spending, the sheer volume of it. I think Elizabeth is using my money in ways she shouldn't be," I said, the words feeling clumsy and ugly in my mouth. "A lot of money, son. And that property tax notice, I'm worried about it. I think she lied to me about paying it." I looked him straight in the eye, trying to pour all the sincerity, all the urgency I felt into my gaze. I didn't expect him to believe me right away, but I expected something. Surprise, concern, even just a question, anything. But I got none of those things. He just looked at me. He held my gaze for a long moment, and then he sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It was worse. It was a heavy, weary sigh. The kind of sigh you give when you're dealing with something difficult, something you just have to endure. And it was full of pity. "Dad," he said, and his voice was so gentle, so patient, the voice you use on a child who's having a tantrum. "You've been through a major surgery. You're still weak. Your head isn't clear yet. Think about all the medication you're on." Every word was a soft, gentle blow from a hammer, cracking the foundations of my sanity. He wasn't just disagreeing with me. He was dismissing me. He was telling me that my own mind, the one thing I had left, was failing me. He reached out and put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture he thought was comforting, but felt like a lead weight. "Elizabeth's been running herself ragged, Dad. She's under a lot of pressure taking care of both of us. You shouldn't be worrying about this stuff. It's not good for you. Just let her handle it." And there it was. The final, killing blow. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just told me in the kindest, most loving way possible that I was crazy, that my legitimate fears, the evidence I was trying to show him, was all just the confused rambling of an old man whose brain was addled by sickness and drugs. In his eyes, I wasn't his father anymore. I wasn't a man to be respected or listened to. I was a patient to be managed. The conversation was over. He picked up the remote and unmuted the TV. The roar of the crowd and the frantic voice of the announcer flooded back into the room, and the game continued as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed, forever. The denial from my own son was 1,000 times more painful than the bruising grip of his wife. A bruise fades, but his words would haunt me. He had taken my only weapon, my voice, my truth, and shattered it. He had invalidated my reality. He had turned me into a senile old man. I sat there, staring blankly at the bright colors flashing across the screen, seeing none of it. I had been rendered completely and utterly invisible. My voice had no weight. My truth had no value. I didn't go to bed that night. I just sat there in my lazy boy in the dark, long after Mark and Elizabeth had gone upstairs. I sat there as the hours ticked by, listening to the old house groan and settle around me. I sat there until the first pale gray fingers of dawn began to creep through the blinds. And for the first time in my 68 years on this earth, I felt a loneliness so profound, so absolute, it was like drowning. Financially and physically controlled by my daughter-in-law. Mentally and emotionally dismissed by my own son. I had built this house. I had built this family. I had built a life with my own 2 hands. And now I was a stranger in it. a ghost haunting the halls of my own legacy. I had finally hit the bottom. There was nowhere lower to go. They say that when you hit rock bottom, there's only one way left to go: up. In the absolute darkness of that long night, adrift in the sea of my own despair, a single, flickering light appeared. It wasn't a grand revelation. It was a small memory, a ghost from years ago that surfaced like a lost buoy. It was from the time just after my wife Martha had passed. I'd felt adrift then, too. I remember watching the news, hearing stories about banks failing, about people's life savings vanishing into thin air. I'd developed a deep distrust of the digital world, of money that was just numbers on a screen. I needed something real, something I could hold in my hand. Martha had understood. "A man needs a safety net, Nick," she'd said. "Something just for him, not for bills, not for groceries, for an emergency." I remember going to the bank and withdrawing $500. 25 brand new, crisp $20 bills. I brought them home and I hid them. I hid them inside a book, a thick, leather-bound history of the American Civil War that no one but me would ever dream of opening. And where had I put that book? In the garage, my last true territory, the one place in this house that was still completely mine. A place Elizabeth rarely, if ever, entered. The memory, once surfaced, became an anchor. Hope, I realized, can be as simple as remembering where you buried the treasure. The next day was an exercise in pure patience. I watched the clock. I watched her. I waited until I saw her grab her car keys and purse to head out for groceries. The moment the car backed out of the driveway, it was my time. Every step was still a battle against the pain in my hip, but now the pain had a purpose. A small, defiant fire was burning in my gut, propelling me forward. I used the wall for support, shuffling my way to the back door. The door creaked open, and the smell of the garage washed over me. It was a scent I knew better than any cologne. It was the smell of motor oil, sawdust, and the cold, clean scent of steel. To anyone else, it might have smelled old and musty. To me, it was the smell of work, of creation, of independence. I breathed it in deep, and I swear I felt a bit of my old strength return to my shoulders. This place was mine. The tools on the pegboard hung exactly where I had left them. The old wooden workbench I built with my own hands stood solid and steady. In here, I was not a patient. I was a man. My eyes scanned the dusty, cluttered shelves in the corner, piled high with old engine repair manuals and stacks of yellowed Popular Mechanics magazines. My heart began to beat a little faster, a nervous rhythm against my ribs. What if I'd remembered wrong? What if she'd found it, cleaned it out? I ran my hand along the faded spines of the books, feeling the grit of the years under my fingertips. And then I saw it, tucked between a Chilton manual for a 1978 Ford pickup and a book on carpentry. The Battle of Gettysburg. My hand trembled as I lifted it from the shelf. It was heavier than I remembered. I blew a cloud of dust off the cover, the motes dancing in the sliver of light from the doorway. I fumbled with the pages, my stiff fingers feeling clumsy. I flipped past maps of troop movements and portraits of grim-faced generals. And then, there it was. Nestled between the chapters on Pickett's charge and the Confederate retreat, the $500 lay flat and untouched, 25 silent witnesses to my past foresight. As I pulled the bills out, the crisp paper felt warm in my hand. This wasn't just money. This was freedom. This was ammunition. This was a way out. Many of us have a special place, don't we? A corner of the garage, a drawer in a workbench, maybe just an old shoebox in the back of the closet. A place where we keep things that matter, things only we know about. Mementos, favorite tools, or maybe even a little cash tucked away for a rainy day. Do you have a secret stash like that? A hidden treasure? Feel free to share if you're so inclined. I carefully folded the money and tucked it deep into my pocket. Now what? The phone in the house was a liability. Every call a potential broadcast to my captor. I needed a secure line. A new thought began to form, sparked by years of watching old detective shows on my television. A burner phone. That's what they always called them. Something cheap, prepaid, and completely anonymous. It would be my secret lifeline to the outside world, to the help I desperately needed. But getting out of the house to buy it was a mission in itself. I had to wait for the right moment, for a legitimate reason she couldn't refuse. A few days later, my opportunity came. My painkillers are all gone, I told Elizabeth, my voice intentionally gravelly. I need a refill from the pharmacy. She immediately offered to drive me, as I knew she would, but this time I refused. I need the WAWA, I said, putting on my best stubborn old man act. Doctor's orders, gotta keep moving. I walked with my cane to the end of our block, out of sight of the living room window. Then I used my own money to do something I hadn't done in years. I called a taxi. Sitting in the back seat, watching my neighborhood slide by, I felt a surge of control I hadn't experienced in months. I had the driver take me to a convenience store a few miles away. I bought the cheapest, simplest, prepaid phone they had on the rack. The whole transaction felt foreign, clandestine, and deeply satisfying. Back home, I smuggled my new weapon inside and hid it in the one place I knew she would never look, inside one of my old steel-toed work boots in the back of my closet. That night, I waited. I lay in bed, listening, until the sounds of the house settled into the deep, quiet rhythm of sleep. Then I slipped out of my room, went into the guest bathroom, and locked the door. I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the door, a sentry in my own prison. I powered on the phone. The small screen glowed in the darkness, a tiny beacon of hope. My hands shook slightly as I punched in a number I knew by heart. The number for Bill. He picked up on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Hello? I pressed the phone to my ear and whispered, my voice tight and urgent. Bill, it's me, it's Nick. I need your help, real bad. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, in that small, locked bathroom, I wasn't alone anymore. The counterattack had begun. On the burner phone, Bill and I arranged a meeting. Just getting out of the house a second time was a strategic operation that required a new, airtight alibi. I had to craft the perfect lie, one that couldn't be questioned or denied. The next morning at breakfast, I waited for the right moment, a lull in Elizabeth's endless chatter about her garden. I have a follow-up physical therapy session today, I announced, trying to keep my voice as casual and steady as I could. The doctor's office at the hospital called yesterday. He said I need to be more aggressive with the rehab if I want to get my mobility back. I chose my words carefully. Doctor and hospital were words that carried weight, words that commanded respect and discouraged questions. She gave me a long, searching look, her eyes narrowing slightly. I could see the gears turning in her head, weighing the possibility of a lie against the risk of looking unconcerned about my health. Finally, she nodded. No one argues with a doctor's orders. I had my green light. I called a taxi from the end of the street and gave the driver the address of a small diner in the next town over, a place I knew we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. The place was called the Patriot Diner. It was an old-school joint, the kind of place where time seems to stand still. The red vinyl on the booth seats was cracked and worn smooth over the decades. The walls were covered in faded black and white photos of local high school football teams. and the air was thick with the rich, comforting smells of brewing coffee and frying bacon. This was our kind of place, a place where men like us could sit for hours over weak coffee and speak plainly, without any pretense. Bill was already there, tucked away in a back corner booth, his back to the door. He was an ex-Marine, a solid, broad-shouldered man of few words, but his eyes missed nothing. Just seeing the familiar set of his shoulders, the quiet confidence in his posture, I felt half the weight I'd been carrying for months begin to lift. I wasn't just meeting a friend, I was reporting for duty. We ordered coffee and toast. The waitress, a woman named Flo who had been working there for 30 years, called us both honey and refilled our mugs without asking. We went through the usual pleasantries, his grandkids, my aching hip, Bill's bad back. Then he leaned forward slightly and got straight to the point. His voice was low. "So what the hell is going on, Nick?" I took a deep breath, the steam from my coffee cup warming my face. Trying to tell this story felt harder than admitting any failure, any mistake I'd ever made in my life. It felt like a betrayal of my own family, my own name. "Bill, there's some things, I don't even know where to start." I let the words hang in the air. Talking felt useless right then. Words could be twisted, dismissed as the ramblings of a confused old man. I needed something that couldn't be argued with. Instead of speaking, I glanced around the diner, making sure no one was paying us any mind. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached down and began to roll up the sleeve of my right flannel shirt. The bruise from Elizabeth's grip, more than a week old now, was still there. It had faded from a deep, angry purple to a sickening yellow-green, a dying star on my skin. I laid my arm on the table between us, under the fluorescent lights of the diner, and said nothing. I just let it speak for me. Bill stared at the mottled skin on my arm. His already stern face seemed to harden, as if it were carved from granite. He didn't offer any of the empty platitudes I'd half expected. No, "I'm so sorry," or "That's terrible." He was just silent. But in his silence, I saw everything I needed to see. I saw the muscle in his jaw clench and unclench. I saw the veins on his temples stand out. He looked up from my arm and met my eyes, and in his gaze there was zero pity. There was only a cold, quiet, simmering rage. "Who the hell did this to you?" he asked, his voice a low growl. That one question, delivered with the flat, dangerous calm of a trained soldier, was worth more than 1,000 expressions of sympathy. He believed me, instantly, without a single solitary doubt. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. The shame I'd been carrying began to dissolve under the heat of his righteous anger. The dam broke. The whole story came pouring out of me. A torrent of fear, humiliation, and confusion that I had held back for too long. I told him about the power of attorney, signed in a fog of pain and medication. I told him about the hidden tax notice, the giant television, the insane credit card bills. I told him about the isolation, the intercepted phone calls. And, in the quietest voice of all, I told him about the conversation with Mark, about the look of pity in my own son's eyes. Bill listened. He just sat there, his coffee growing cold, and listened without interruption, giving a slow, deliberate nod every so often. When I finally ran out of words, exhausted and empty, he didn't talk about revenge or teaching anyone a lesson. He talked strategy. "All right, Nick," he said, his voice calm and measured. "We can't act on emotion. Emotion is the enemy right now. It makes you sloppy. What you need is irrefutable proof. We need a plan." And then he laid out the first steps. The words were simple, practical, and brilliant. Get a hidden camera. One of those little ones that looks like a USB charger. Plant it in the living room, Record everything. Gather the truth. When I left the diner, the sun had broken through the morning clouds. I no longer felt like a weak, helpless old man shuffling out of a secret meeting. I felt like a soldier who had just been given his mission briefing. Bill had given me more than a plan. He had given me back my ally. He had restored my sanity by validating my truth. He took my messy, humiliating story and forged it into a weapon. I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was probably going to get a lot uglier before it got better. But as I got into the taxi to go back to the house that felt more like enemy territory than a home, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't walking into that battle alone anymore. I had a brother in arms, and we had a mission to accomplish. Following Bill's advice, I knew my next move. I needed a hidden camera. But how do you buy a surveillance device when you yourself are under constant surveillance? I had to engineer another mission, another believable lie. A few mornings later, I saw my opening. The bulb in the garage fixture finally burned out, I announced to Elizabeth as she placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of me. And that damn faucet in the guest bathroom has been dripping for a week. It's driving me nuts. I let out an exaggerated, grumpy sigh. I'm going to Home Depot to pick up a few things. Repairs. That was my language, my world. It was a territory she couldn't question, a script she couldn't challenge. The trip to the Home Depot felt like a pilgrimage back to my own life. The smell of fresh-cut lumber, of paint thinner and cold steel, it settled my nerves. I walked the wide concrete aisles, surrounded by other men pushing carts, men looking for solutions, for the right tool to fix a problem. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. I felt like myself again. I found what I was looking for in the home security aisle, a tiny camera, expertly disguised as a simple black digital alarm clock. It was perfect. The garage, once again, became my sanctuary and my strategic workshop. I told Elizabeth I needed to finally organize my tool bench, a task I often undertook when I was restless, something she'd seen me do 100 times before. There, under the familiar orderly ranks of wrenches, pliers, and power drills hanging on the pegboard, I hunched over the tiny device. I carefully unboxed it and spread the instructions out on the workbench. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man who had once assembled complex industrial boilers from sprawling blueprints, now squinting at a tiny pamphlet for a piece of consumer electronics made in China. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the success of this small project was more critical than any I had ever undertaken in my entire career. This camera was going to be my silent eye. It was going to be the one witness in this house that could not and would not lie. Choosing the right location was everything. It had to have a clear view of the living room, the main stage for our daily interactions, but it had to blend in so perfectly that it would be invisible in plain sight. After surveying the room from every angle, I found the spot. A bookshelf filled with old paperbacks and historical volumes. I would place it there, nestled between a Tom Clancy novel and a thick biography of Winston Churchill. It would look completely innocuous, just another digital clock in a room full of ordinary objects. I waited until well after midnight, until the house was steeped in the profound silence of deep sleep. I crept out into the living room, my every movement slow and deliberate. The old floorboards threatened to betray me with a groan, so I trod carefully, my heart hammering against my ribs. I gently placed the clock on the shelf, adjusting its angle just so. I plugged the power cord into the outlet behind the bookshelf. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline. It felt like I was arming a bomb, setting a timer without knowing exactly when it was set to go off. The days that followed were a masterclass in patience and acting. I had to be the same man I had been for weeks, a little grumpy, a little slow. a patient recovering from surgery. I sat in my lazy boy. I watched television. I endured Elizabeth's cloying sweetness and her suffocating control. I played my part to perfection. But inside, everything was different. I was no longer a passive spectator in her cruel little play. I was the secret director, recording her every move. That small digital clock on the bookshelf was my only ally in the house, a silent, tireless sentry, quietly gathering the truth, one frame at a time, one lie at a time. Each night became a ritual. I would wait, listening, until the house was still. Then I'd slip into the dark living room and, with the delicate touch of a safecracker, eject the tiny memory card from the side of the clock. I'd retreat to the garage, to my old dusty laptop, my command center, and I would watch the day's footage. What I saw was both agonizing and validating. I watched her roll her eyes in contempt the moment I turned my back, struggling with my cane. I listened to her on the phone with her friends, her voice dripping with false modesty as she bragged about a new purse she'd bought with the old man's money. I saw her take the mail from the mailbox and, after a cursory glance, toss a handful of what looked like important official-looking envelopes straight into the trash. Each clip was painful to watch, like peeling the scab off a wound to look at the infection underneath. But each clip was also a bullet, another round of ammunition loaded into the magazine of my truth. There's a strange power in seeing your reality confirmed in high definition. The truth was no longer a vague suspicion, an old man's paranoia. It was now a collection of images and sounds, concrete and undeniable. Elizabeth thought she was in complete control, that she was the smartest person in the house, playing a game that I didn't even know existed. But she had no idea that in the silence, in the shadows, I was building a case against her. A case built from the bricks of her own lies, mortared by her own arrogance. And I knew, with every passing day, with every piece of footage I saved, that her wall of deceit was about to come crashing down. In the back of my bedroom closet, on the highest shelf, sits a small, plain oak box. It's not made of expensive wood. It has no fancy carvings. But to me, it is more valuable than this house and every dollar I have to my name. Inside, resting on a bed of red velvet that is faded to the color of dried blood, are my military medals. The Purple Heart, with its solemn profile of Washington, the Silver Star, for gallantry in action. They are not shiny trinkets for show. I've never been that kind of man. Each one is a story etched in metal. Each one is a silent memorial to a brother who never made it home. Each one is a heavy, tangible piece of my youth that I left behind in the mud and the heat of a foreign land. About once a month, for as long as I can remember, I have a ritual. I take the box down, carry it to my bed, and with a soft, clean cloth, the same kind I used to clean my rifle, I gently polish each metal. It's a quiet ceremony. As I hold the Purple Heart, I feel the ghost of the shrapnel that tore through my leg. As I wipe down the Silver Star, I see the face of a young corporal from Ohio, a kid who pulled me into a ditch moments before a mortar round landed where I'd been standing. He didn't make it to the next morning. This ritual is my way to remember, my way to honor them, a way to keep the past from fading into a silent, forgotten history. One afternoon, after weeks of the simmering tension and silent warfare in my own home, I felt a deep, unshakable need to perform that ritual. I needed to reconnect with the man I used to be, the young soldier who understood his mission, to find some of his strength in the frail shell of the old man I'd become. I laboriously climbed onto a small footstool, my new hip groaning in protest, and reached for the box. The moment my fingers closed around the familiar polished wood, a cold dread washed over me. It felt wrong. It was unnervingly, impossibly light. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm like incoming artillery. With trembling hands, I carried the box to my bed and lifted the lid. Inside, the red velvet lining was completely, brutally bare. A cold, cruel, gaping emptiness. The feeling was so visceral, it stole the air from my lungs. It felt as though someone had reached directly into my chest, past bone and sinew, and ripped my heart out, leaving nothing but a hollow, echoing cavity. The world around me seemed to fall silent, the air growing thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. I don't remember walking out of the bedroom, the empty box clutched in my hand like a dead thing. It was like moving through a nightmare, my feet disconnected from the floor. I found Elizabeth at the kitchen table, casually flipping through a glossy fashion magazine, a cup of tea steaming beside her as if it were just another Tuesday afternoon. "Where are they?" I asked. The voice that came out of my throat was a stranger's, a dry, ragged whisper I barely recognized as my own. She glanced up, her eyes flicking from my face to the open box and back again. There was no surprise in her expression, no guilt, not even a flicker of concern. Nothing. "Oh, those old things," she said, her tone so casual, so dismissive, it was like a slap. "I pawned them." I just stood there, the words hanging in the air, echoing in the sudden ringing silence of my mind. I couldn't process it. It was unthinkable, a reality my brain refused to accept. "I needed the money for an urgent bill," she added, her eyes already drifting back down to the magazine page, dismissing me, dismissing my entire life. "I'll get them back eventually, when we have the money." If she had stolen my money, that was theft. If she had bruised my arm, that was cruelty. But this was a desecration, a violation so profound, so sacrilegious, it defied words. She hadn't just sold a few pieces of metal. She had taken my honor, the blood and sacrifice of my youth, the sacred memory of my fallen comrades. And she had sold it all for a few dollars to spend on her trivial, meaningless wants. In that one soul-crushing moment, I knew this fight was no longer about money or the house. This was a war for a man's legacy. It was a battle for his very soul. Each of us has things we hold sacred, not because of what they're worth, but because of the story, the honor they represent. It might be a father's watch, a set of tools that have seen a lifetime of work, or service medals from a war long past. For you, what is that one thing that is untouchable? Let me know in the comments below. Strangely, the anger that rose in me wasn't a raging fire. It was ice. A cold, deadly calm washed over me, extinguishing every other feeling, the shock, the pain, the grief. All of it was gone, replaced by a pure, focused clarity. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just stood there, staring at her. And I think, in that long, silent stare, for the very first time, she saw the danger. She wasn't looking at a weak, confused old man anymore. Her smug little smile faltered. She was looking at a man who had been pushed past his breaking point. A man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. And as they say, a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man of all. I turned without another word, the empty box still in my hand, and walked back to my room. Each step was steady, deliberate. The oak box was still on the bed, lying open like a fresh wound, an open grave. I knew what I had to do. There could be no more delays, no more waiting for more proof from the silent eye. The final line had been crossed. It was time to bring the curtain down on this entire charade, once and for all. My hand was perfectly steady as I reached for the phone on my nightstand, not the burner phone, but the landline, the one the whole house used. I was going to call Mark, and I was going to tell him exactly what kind of monster his wife, the woman he trusted and defended, truly was. The war had begun. The moment my fingers touched the cool plastic of the landline receiver, my hand trembling not with weakness but with the cold, hard weight of my decision, the bedroom door flew open. Elizabeth stood there, framed in the doorway like a cornered animal, her chest heaving, her face a mask of fury. She must have heard the sudden, unnerving silence from the living room, the absence of my usual shuffling movements. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, the sound tearing through the quiet house. Her eyes, wild, darted from my face to the phone in my hand. "Are you trying to ruin us? Are you trying to destroy your own son's happiness?" She didn't wait for an answer. She lunged forward, a blur of rage, and in one swift, violent motion she ripped the phone from my grasp. The cord stretched taut for a second before snapping back. With a guttural scream, she hurled the receiver against the far wall. It exploded on impact, the beige plastic shattering into a dozen pieces that skittered across the hardwood floor. She had severed my line to the outside world, but she had no idea that another eye, a silent digital witness, was watching her every move. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself to my feet to face her. The throbbing ache in my hip seemed to have vanished, replaced by that same strange, icy calm that had settled over me earlier. "You've gone too far, Elizabeth," I said, my voice low and even, devoid of the fear she expected. My calmness seemed only to enrage her further. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. "Too far?" she spat, her voice a venomous hiss. "You have no idea how far I can go." And then, in a flash of pure, uncontrolled fury, she swung her open hand. The sound was sharp, ugly, a dry crack that echoed in the small room, louder than a gunshot. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A searing, white-hot pain erupted across my cheek, and my ear began to ring, a high-pitched, piercing tone that drowned out everything else. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a veiled shove in a narrow hallway. This wasn't a warning grip on my arm. This was raw, undisguised violence, delivered with the full intent to harm and humiliate. She stepped closer, invading my space until her face was inches from mine. I could feel her hot, ragged breath on my skin, could smell the bitter hatred coming off her in waves. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated with a terrifying madness. "Listen to me, you old fool," she snarled, each word a poisoned dart. "If you breathe one word of this to Mark, one single word, I will go to a judge and I will tell them you've lost your mind. I will tell them you're a danger to yourself. They will lock you away in the cheapest, filthiest nursing home I can find, and you will rot there. You will never see your son again. You will never see your grandchildren again. Do you understand me?" It was a perfectly calculated threat, designed to strike at the very heart of who I am, to obliterate the one thing left in this world that I still loved with every fiber of my being, my family. But as I looked into her furious, hate-filled eyes, a strange thing happened. For the first time, I felt no fear. I felt nothing but a profound, almost detached sense of pity. In her rage, in her desperate bid for total control, she was completely blind. She had no idea that she had just sealed her own fate. She had no idea that her vicious act, her cruel, calculated threat, every single syllable, had just been perfectly recorded by the unassuming digital clock sitting silently on my bookshelf. She thought she was standing on the pinnacle of her power, that she had finally beaten me into submission, silenced me forever. In reality, she was standing in the dead center of a perfectly laid trap, a trap she had just willingly and violently sprung on herself. And so I did the only thing a man in my position, beaten, threatened, and cornered, could do. I gave her exactly what she wanted to see. I let my shoulders slump. I took a stumbling step backward, my eyes wide with what she would perceive as terror. I collapsed onto the edge of my bed, buried my face in my hands, and let my body shake with feigned, broken sobs. I gave her the performance of a lifetime, a portrait of a man utterly and completely shattered, a perfect victim. She watched me for a long moment, a slow, triumphant, and utterly contemptuous smile spreading across her face. She believed she had won. She had no idea I wasn't acting for her. I was acting for a much more important audience, a future jury. With a final disgusted snort, she turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the house, leaving me alone in the ringing silence, my right cheek still burning like a brand. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the frantic pounding of my own heart. Then, slowly, I got to my feet and walked to the bookshelf. I gently picked up the digital clock. The red numbers glowed steadily, displaying the time with perfect mundane accuracy, but I knew its true function. It wasn't a keeper of time, it was a keeper of truth. I had it, the final, undeniable piece. The play was over. It was time for the curtain to fall. I didn't call the police right away. The thought of a screaming, chaotic scene, of dragging this family drama out into the street for the neighbors to see, it wasn't my way. Hot-headed revenge is a fool's game. I called Bill. And Bill, a man who understands strategy, called a lawyer he knew, a sharp woman who specialized in elder abuse cases. Together, the three of us formed a plan over the phone. A plan not for destruction, but for revelation. A plan to let the truth do the work. That Saturday, I told Mark I had something very important that I needed to show both him and Elizabeth. I could see the weariness in my son's eyes, the apprehension. He probably thought he was about to endure another one of his father's confused episodes. I asked them to sit in the living room. The silence was thick with tension as I walked over to the massive flat-screen television, Elizabeth's television, bought with my money. With steady hands, I pulled the tiny memory card from my pocket and slid it into an adapter connected to the TV's USB port. I stood back, the remote in my hand feeling as heavy as a judge's gavel. With the two of them sitting on the sofa, a captive audience in my own home, I pressed play. There was no introduction, no narration from me, just the raw, unedited footage from the silent eye on the bookshelf. Mark sat frozen on the couch, his body rigid. He watched his wife, the mother of his children, a woman he loved and defended, screaming in my face. He watched her shove me. He watched in crystal clear, high definition as her hand swung through the air and connected with my cheek with that sickening crack. He heard every single word of her threat to lock me away in a nursing home, to sever me from my family forever. I watched my son's face as he watched the screen. It was a terrible, agonizing thing to witness. His expression cycled through a storm of emotions. First, a deep, furrowed confusion, then utter disbelief, which gave way to a dawning, horrified shock. And finally, as the reality of it all crashed down upon him, his face crumpled into an expression of profound, unspeakable pain. Elizabeth beside him had gone completely white, the color draining from her face until she was as pale as a ghost. She started to stammer. "Mark, no, it's not what it looks like. He was..." But her words trailed off into a pathetic whimper. There was no defense. The images on the screen were absolute. The intricate wall of lies she had so carefully constructed over months had just been demolished in under 5 minutes. Precisely as the video ended, just as the screen went black, there was a firm knock on the front door. It was my lawyer, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. Everything that happened next was swift, professional, and almost eerily quiet. My lawyer served Elizabeth the legal papers, a motion to immediately revoke the power of attorney I had signed under duress. The officers took my statement in private, in the dining room, noting the faint yellowing bruise that was still visible on my cheek. There was no more screaming from Elizabeth, no more pathetic attempts at justification. She just sat there, small and shrunken on the expensive sofa, a paper tiger soaked through by a final cleansing rain. Justice, I learned, doesn't always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes in the quiet rustle of legal papers and the calm procedural language of the law. This story is almost at its end. I want to ask you something. Do you believe in second chances? Forgiving someone who has hurt you so deeply is one of the hardest things a person can do. In situations like this, what do you think is more important, the strictness of justice or the healing power of forgiveness? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. After the lawyer, the police, and finally Elizabeth had all gone, a profound silence fell over the house. It was just me and Mark sitting in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of our family. He wouldn't look at me. He just sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped so tightly together that his knuckles were white. A long time passed. Finally he spoke, his voice cracking with emotion. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything. I just gave a slight, slow nod. There was no feeling of triumph in me, no satisfaction in seeing my son so broken. There was only a deep, bottomless sadness for him, for this good man who had been blinded by love and manipulation. I knew his road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least now he could finally see the path. In the days that followed, the house was quieter than it had been in years. Elizabeth's things were gone. I never asked Mark about the legal proceedings that followed. That was their business. My business was to begin cleaning up my own life. And I didn't start with the house. I started in the garage. I spent the entire weekend out there, in my sanctuary. I took every single wrench off the pegboard and wiped it clean. I sorted every nut and bolt into its proper container. I sharpened the blades on my table saw. I swept away months of accumulated sawdust from the concrete floor. I worked slowly, methodically, losing myself in the familiar, comforting tasks. It wasn't just about tidying up. It was a symbolic act. I was restoring order, not just to my workshop, but to my entire world. That Sunday evening, after the work was done, I sat in my lazy boy, a cold beer in my hand. For the first time in a long time, the house felt right again. It was no longer a cage or a battlefield. It was a sanctuary. It was my legacy. The war was over. I had lost money. I had endured pain, both the kind you can see and the kind you can't. But in the end, I had won back the things that truly mattered. My home, my dignity, and the right to live out my remaining years in peace and on my own terms. And that's my story, or at least the hardest part of it. But sitting here now, in the quiet of my own home, I realize my story isn't just about me. I know that when we men, those of us who've seen more than a few decades pass, get together, the stories can just start to flow. Today, I've opened up a part of my life, and now I'd be honored to hear a part of yours. You know, sometimes it's just a simple click, a like, a subscribe, or a share that might seem like a small passing gesture to many. But to me, and to other quiet voices that need to be heard, every single one of those clicks is like a light in the darkness. It says, I see you. I hear you. Your story matters. Now that I've shared my story, what I'd like most is to hear from you. In the comments below, I would be truly honored if you would share a piece of your own story. Was there a time you felt dismissed or unheard? Is there a passion you have that others might have called foolish? Or what was a moment when you found your own strength, even in the quietest way? Please, share it. I'll read them, and I'll carry them with me because your stories are important. WAWA Ages wants to build a community where we men, fathers and grandfathers, can share our real experiences, the good and the bad. If you don't have a hardship to share today, then share a small victory. What made you smile today? If you're watching this on a television, don't hesitate to pick up your phone and look up my channel, WAWA Ages. Let's build this place together, a community where no man has to feel like his life, his struggles, and his triumphs are invisible. Thank you for sitting here with me. It means more than you know.